90.5 FM is WUOG Athens, and welcome into another episode of 60 at 6 on this Monday on 90.5 WUOG. I'm your host, Gunter Schroeder. We're joined by Bryson Scruggs, Katie Carlson, and TJ French for another episode where we're getting into Georgia football's big win over Texas on Saturday. We'll talk about the defensive performance and the offensive performance, as well as some other SEC games in the national slate in college football for this week and next, as Georgia goes into their bye week ahead of the Florida game. We'll talk about the Atlanta Falcons, who had maybe a bit of a reality check this week against the Seattle Seahawks at home. A 34-14 loss leaves them at 4-3 as they get into another division matchup, this time on the road against the Buccaneers. We'll see what the Bucs can do against the Ravens tonight ahead of that one, and see if the Falcons will still be first in the division when that matchup comes around. And we'll get into the Atlanta Hawks for the first time this year as they open their season against the Nets on Wednesday and the Hornets on Friday as their first two games before they go on the road to Oklahoma City and challenge the Oklahoma City Thunder. But as always, we'll get ready to start with the Georgia Bulldogs and a big win on the road, although maybe a bit of a sloppy one for some people. A 30-15 win, though, against the number one team in the country, though, is always something to be happy about, even if it comes with some questionable reffing decisions and questionable offensive play. But certainly, we'll have to talk about the defense first, Bryson. What a performance from them. Everything got thrown at them, and they still delivered what was probably the best defensive performance we've seen since maybe 2 years ago.
Absolutely. What a performance. You thought that coming into this game, Texas was kind of built to give Georgia problems with all the weapons that they have, an experienced quarterback. But the Dogs came in with a great game plan, came in with exotic blitzes, and the pass rush just took over. That was kind of the story of the game. Jalen Walker, constant pressure, but he wasn't alone. Damon Wilson was wreaking havoc, stripping sacks. Chaz Chambliss put the icing on the cake at the very end there to shut down all Texas's hopes. So, and then the secondary, as the pass rush was affecting the quarterback, the secondary stepped up. Shout out to Dalen Everett. I mean, I know on this show we've been giving him a really hard time for the past couple weeks.
Not just us.
Yeah, not just us.
Everyone was giving him a hard time.
So all the credit to him for responding. And one thing we talked about, we questioned – last week it was, Georgia's the biggest, this is their first time being in the underdog role. We were questioning, is Kirby going to use this as bulletin board material? And I love he addressed it at the very end of the game. He's like, yeah, nobody on this network, talking about College Game Day, picked us to win this. No one gave us a chance, and the referees try to rob us. But these boys were resilient and still got it done.
Yeah, it was all true. I mean, everyone did kind of count them out, especially Game Day. One thing I was really impressed was just the physicality on both sides of the ball, and especially on the line of scrimmage. They easily won both lines of scrimmage, establishing the run game on the offense and then just wreaking havoc on the defensive side. And another thing, I don't know if it's little or what the magnitude of it is, but just their ability to turn the ball over. They turned the ball over a couple times in the first quarter, and then just to not give up any points off those turnovers were huge, because the game could have looked a lot different if the first two interceptions that Beck threw resulted in points. And I think that was a big kind of shift in the game. But just the physicality of the Dogs was really impressive. And as Georgia people, it's great to see, because a lot of people were doubting that aspect of our game.
Yeah, definitely so. I think definitely more of a reality check for both fan bases. Maybe some Georgia fans were feeling down on us coming into this game, especially against a Texas team that had dominated the early part of the schedule, but we did say they hadn't played really any sort of big competition so far. So, Katie, what do you think Georgia had to learn from this one coming up against a Texas team that looked, really good on paper, and basically everything kind of went wrong for them on offense especially?
Yeah, I think kind of like what everyone said, just Georgia, I feel like from a fan perspective, like the reason there was so much doubt was that we didn't know which team was going to show up. We didn't know if it was going to be first half Alabama or second half Alabama, or pick that from literally any of the games we've played so far. And I'd still say it wasn't a complete game. Like you mentioned earlier, there definitely was some sloppiness with our own turnovers and giving up a couple big chunk plays on defense, but overall it was by far our best game. And I think, kind of just repeating you again, like we said, Texas hadn't really played anybody. I mean, they did have a couple ranked matchups at the time, but obviously we saw Oklahoma is really not that good, and couple other teams that have struggled since. Yeah, Michigan. So I think it was really just a game where there was so much uncertainty, which is why it really surprised me that nobody on game day picked Georgia. Just also given our history of literally we haven't lost to a single team in 50-plus games that's not named Alabama.
Yeah, a little disrespect there.
For real.
Say, right? I mean, and that it has to feel good for Georgia to kind of show everyone up a little, I think.
Oh, definitely. Well, I think that was one of the more defining interviews Kirby's ever done, was just kind of remind everybody, this is still our conference, to a new team that was kind of coming in thinking they had broken into the conference with a bang. Obviously did start 2-0 in the conference did Texas, playing against Mississippi State and Oklahoma, but obviously neither of those teams doing particularly well. I still do think Texas is probably easily, you'd have to say, a top 3 team in the SEC at this point. Probably can't put them much lower than that with how some of these programs have maybe struggled or surprisingly dropped a game. We'll get into some of those in a little bit. But going to the run game next, I think on the offensive side of the ball, some things did go wrong, but every time Georgia needed a big run, they got it from Trevor Etienne, who reached the end zone 3 times on 19 carries. And TJ, he seems to have solidified himself as Georgia's number 1 back, you think?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you can just tell in the stats a little bit. They were really relying on him heavily, weren't really giving anyone else touches. And it did just seem like the moments that you weren't really comfortable throwing the ball because, I mean, let's be honest, Carson Beck didn't have the best, game on paper. So in those moments, you were able to trust the back, which is a good welcome sign. And just the offensive line, just getting back to how they're used to playing, moving guys, getting to the second level, creating space. It was definitely exciting to see. And I think Trevor Etienne, without a doubt, his best game as a Bulldog. And I think it'll just only continue to get better from here.
I will say, just adding in, we do have a bunch of injuries in the running back room. I do think he is the number 1 option, but I don't think looking at snap counts for this game in particular says a whole lot because Branson was hurt. There's still
Robinson was out too,
Robinson's out, and then there's still kind of a question about if Nate Frazier's fully healthy or not. So
yeah, they only gave him 4 carries. Everyone else, I mean,
but
it was
I
just
do think
ETN last night.
I do think he is the first option, but something to know.
I just think they're kind of moving away from Frazier a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's because of injury or production, but
I really don't know why, though. I mean, it really seemed like he could have been a surprise freshman standout maybe on the team. Obviously, the last few years, you had those, maybe not stars like Brock Bowers, like those kind of outliers, but contributors. I feel like Michael Williams did a pretty good job, and we always kind of thought he was going to grow into a star defensive end, even the first year when he was getting some playing time alongside Jalen Carter and these kinds of guys. But I did think this would kind of be his opportunity maybe with some of these other guys out to get some touches, and obviously Kirby was kind of relying on a bell cow, which he really doesn't do very often, but maybe understandable with some of these statistics from the Georgia passing offense. Obviously Carson Beck, not his finest game, probably his weakest performance of the season in all honesty. 175 yards, 3 interceptions, no touchdowns. But I will say, as a whole, the passing offense probably had a night to forget. Lots of drop passes from Dylan Bells at the start to London Humphreys, where it hits him square in the chest, drops it. Bryson, what did you think about the passing display? Do you think there's things that can be corrected? Do you think it's as simple as just getting the guys on the jugs machines on Monday and getting them to just get the reps in, or is it something larger that you were going to have to worry about?
I wish it was as simple as just hitting the jugs machine. No doubt, not 100% of the blame can be on Beck because the drops are there, but he deserves majority of the blame. I think it was second possession, his first interception. It was man-to-man coverage, and then the guy basically ball hawked it. It was an incredible play, but
it was a nice play.
But it just still wasn't an open man. Like
Yeah.
it was a risky throw. Credit to the defender, but still not a good decision. So that's a turnover in your own territory, and we're thinking, "Oh, here we go again.
That's
this is looking like
exactly
Alabama."
what I was thinking.
I think every Georgia fan had that replaying in their mind. And once Georgia kind of got out of that sticky situation, you're like, "Okay, we regained composure. Now we're driving. We're in the red zone. Here comes Lawson Lucky on a wide open slant on third down." Too high, too outside, and defenses practice tip drill every single day. Tip drills, that's an easy one for them to intercept. And then the final interception is where, I don't know if we're ready to bring it up yet, but the controversial
we'll definitely
penalty.
get into it.
So we'll save that a little later on down the line. But overall, like, it just seems like this is not the same Carson Beck that we had a year ago. And it's easy to perform a season ago when you have Brock Bowers, when you have Ladd McConkey. I don't think we have a weapon that is super dynamic and super, if it's man-to-man, this is my go-to guy. He hasn't really found that yet. So
In a sense, I feel like there's almost more individual pressure on him this year, and I'm wondering if that's like last year. There's obviously a ton of pressure for the three-peat, but that was more a team as a whole thing. I don't think that was fully placed on Carson, but then coming into this season, he's the Heisman favorite. Like, everyone knows he could have gone to the draft, but came back to try to, like, be up there with the number one pick, and so now there's a lot more
hurting his stock now.
there's a lot more individual pressure on him, and it's not going too well. It's not awful. Like, definitely could be worse.
I think
but
if you're like taking the interceptions away, because the first two didn't result in any points. The last one, it was controversial, so it was still a bad throw, which is what really concerns me. It's just
That's the ultimate thing. It was just not a good throw.
The decision making is not what we had seen a year ago, and that's the biggest thing for me.
yeah, I think the controversialness of it didn't come from the actual interception. It was everything that ensued afterwards.
I think it was the flag too, because it was a weak flag called anyway.
Yeah.
I just don't think you can call that. But
Yeah, definitely not. I will say, when they needed a big drive right after Texas gets the second touchdown, they only trail by 8. On third down, when he needed to, he made 2 good passes that got us into what was eventually the game-winning or the game-sealing touchdown on the ground. Good for him. I guess, you got to work through quite a few things to, get down the field. And he was in, a situation back against the wall, made a couple nice throws. And then we just kind of let the run game do the rest. But I feel like that was very much needed at that point. Obviously, overall, not a great night for the passing offense. Lots to work on, I would think. But we'll get into the biggest conversation starter of this game later on, the refereeing. And it wasn't just that, obviously, that controversial defensive pass interference that was somehow overturned after Texas throws beer cans on the field. It was everything, it seemed like, Katie, from the replay officials not getting these calls right, weren't able to.
There were definitely multiple instances. I know I've seen screenshots of Ewers in his own end zone. I don't know the numbers of I don't know who it was for us, but one of our guys, his entire jersey's just getting stretched behind him, clearly an obvious hold. The other guy on the outside's getting blocked in the back. Like, on the same play, nothing was called. Obviously, that would have been a safety. Then we have the 2 targeting penalties at the end.
That was absurd.
I think the one on Dan Jackson was a little bit more reasonable than the other one, because he did put he did put his helmet down. What he needs to do in that situation is be looking forward. The thing that bothers me with both of them is the offensive player also drops their helmet. And I think moving forward, if we're going to be so particular on calling these penalties, that you need to be able to call them on the offense too, because in the end, it's all about safety and player safety. So if the offensive player is the one initiating the head-to-head contact, why is the defensive player getting flagged? Because there's nothing that once they're in tackling thing, it's a lot harder for them to move their head, because, like, you lead with it. Like, you literally can't lead with anything else. But an offensive player, it's a lot easier for them to drop it and try to get that flag.
It seems like the only defining identifier of targeting is leading with the crown of the helmet. But other than that, it seems so up to the judgment of the refs, and it's kind of a mysterious definition.
You also had the one a couple weeks ago in the Miami Cal game that was just so obviously targeting. I don't know if you guys remember it, and it was reviewed and then deemed not targeting. So, like, it's just such a judgment call. And I also think moving forward, they need to go into almost like a flagrant 1, flagrant 2 basketball style call where it's not just an automatic ejection every single time.
Yeah, maybe. I would definitely agree with that as something like maybe he just comes out for the rest of the drive. I mean, obviously,
I think
that's
it can
going to have
be
more
like
implications down
like
the line.
a 15-yard automatic first, almost like a unsportsmanlike penalty where if you get 2 of them, you can get ejected. But
do you think that what Kirby said just about it's setting a precedent about like the beer cans and stuff?
That
Now, here's my take on that is, I mean, besides it being pretty classless, because I mean, simply no one does that on football.
Tennessee's
the only one. I mean,
the UT school.
It's happened in other.
Let's just say
sports.
the Braves are not innocent in this, but we're not going to get into that.
But I just think, you're Texas and you have this huge SEC game, and you look up at halftime and it's 23-0, and you're just upset. So then in that moment, it's just such an easy thing to take it out on, and just, I guess it was just a rally in the student section, and just all of a sudden everyone's torpedoing cans onto the field.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you guys think about that whole situation in general?
I don't like that the decision was made after the ball was spotted. Like, and the rules analyst, the replay analyst that was on the broadcast, he said he's completely shocked, and this is not a reviewable penalty. Like, that's a judgment call that has to be made on the field, has to be discussed with the officiating crew. This is not something that was replayed. So I think the debris on the field heavily made them reconsider. I don't think it was pass interference. I do think it was marginal contact, not worth the flag. But if you call it and you spot the football, it's too late. It's already been done.
Exactly. Which is, I think, what most people had an issue with. Is just, you hate to see a call be made and then all of a sudden they're conferring, the game's kind of delayed again for a while, and then they get the chance to reverse it.
Well, and the thing is, there's going to be bad calls in every single football game. There's going to be calls that you don't agree with every single time. That doesn't mean you can just throw trash on the field when you don't get something that you want.
Their coaching staff is over there picking up the cans, and their cheerleaders. It's just, it's just low to me, I think. And,
for sure.
If you're just not ready for the moment, you're not ready for the moment. It was just a clear salty play.
They were
Definitely
fined
so.
$250,000, and then they have to use everything in their ability to identify members of the crowd who threw something on the field and revoke their tickets for the remainder of the year.
I saw that,
And if they fail to do that, the SEC said they might ban alcohol sales at the game.
Just at Texas?
I'm pretty sure. However, I did see, I saw this on
They made it, 1 year?
Welcome
Twitter.
to the SEC, fellas.
I saw this on Twitter, and I don't know how accurate it is because I did not fact check it. But Barstool Longhorns posted that students were receiving text messages from Texas Athletics saying, "You've been identified as someone who threw something. Your tickets will be revoked for the remainder of the year. If you have questions, contact the athletic department."
I like that. I like that from them.
Yeah, I thought something would happen like that when I saw Jerry Moorhead on the field after the game and Greg Sankey over there too. I was like, yeah, there's something definitely being discussed there. That's a good precedent to set, I think. Obviously, there'd be more of a big deal made out of it. At the end of the day, I will say, one, not a pass interference call, but the flag is thrown, and the rules say I would have been fine with it if they had discussed it on the field before they spotted the ball.
Before.
If they'd said there's no foul in the play for pass interference, that's clearly something that happens, and it happened at other times in the game too. I'm pretty sure they picked up a defensive pass interference flag. Maybe I'm thinking of the Falcons game, but
I mean, it happens all the time, so
it happens all the time.
Picking up a flag is
But
okay.
it definitely.
The other thing that
people were joking that the refs were like saying, in the thing, oh yeah, we're gonna get followed after the game if we don't change the call. Let's just do that.
The other thing that I feel like people haven't really been noticing as much is that the clock ran when they respotted the ball, and like they ran it and didn't fully reset it all the way.
I did not notice that.
I didn't notice it myself either.
Yeah.
I saw someone mention it, and I
situation.
rewatched the highlights from today's game. And when they started throwing stuff on the field, the clock was at 3 minutes. By the time Texas had the ball on their 9-yard line, it was at 2:48.
Wow.
Yeah. There were a lot
and
of...
that never got addressed.
Yeah. Besides that, obviously, the correct measures were made to address like the whole fan situation. I definitely think that made them change the call, and that's not like allowed.
Yeah.
You can't spot the ball because it is a non-reviewable call. That's essentially just reviewing it when you're not allowed to do that in college athletics.
I think, the other option is that they did have a replay official looking at it during that time and call down and just say, like,
well, I know
no, that was a bad call.
Yeah, see, that's my problem. Just
like, we don't know if he decided or...
A lot of people are already suspicious about refereeing and officiating, especially in football, and I don't like that it's dragged on for so long. And I don't, this is just my theory, but, like, just people, upper executives are chiming down to those officials saying, yo, we got a chance here to maybe make this one a little closer. Let's go ahead and pick it up. Or
at the end of the day, I think if the refs make the mistake of throwing that flag, they have to live with it. Probably the correct call was eventually made, and obviously it let Texas back into the game. But I think that just shows, sloppy officiating. And it was a theme throughout the night. I mean, they looked right at Trevor Etienne, put the ball over the plane, not a touchdown. You watched him put the ball over the plane for what would have been the ending first down, not a touchdown. And the two targeting calls. I think the one on Dan Jackson, it was called targeting on the field. Maybe you don't have enough evidence to overturn it. But the fact that they went back and looked at Jonel Aguero's hit after the fact and deemed that there was enough to... say it was targeting when it was less extreme than Dan Jackson. Neither of the offensive receivers that caught the ball really had any sort of... They didn't really have they didn't have an injury. It wasn't...
And they weren't defenseless either.
Which
means it has to be even more, like, forcible contact.
And they also didn't hit helmet to helmet. I believe it was either one of them hit their shoulder and not his head.
It was like a glancing blow with the helmet. So, like, there was contact, but it was not the main contact of the play. And so that's like the annoying part of it.
Yeah, that
maybe, I don't know.
The targeting call is really has reached the level now of the what is a catch and what's not a catch here. The offensive player they're really not defenseless there. I think that's the thing there.
Neither of them were defenseless receivers.
Both of them went
a pivotal call, if you're going to disqualify a player.
And that does hurt too, obviously. I believe they're both out for the first half of the Florida game, and the DB room, as we mentioned, had a good game, played very well, but they didn't have nearly the same firepower.
Maybe the DB room played
guys.
a lot better because we got to the quarterback a lot faster.
I think so.
I think the best thing going forward with us, especially in that situation, was that at least we already had KJ Bolden getting consistent reps, and we didn't just have to throw a completely brand new true freshman into the game against the number one team in the country and like expect them to do something. Like, he already had a bunch of experience this season, so I think we kind of maybe got a little lucky that we had someone to step in.
That's another thing. I would have said our tackling was much better this game, especially in the open field. CJ Allen had a big tackle in the open field that stopped them from scoring a touchdown. I know KJ Bolden had some good tackles too, especially on the goal line.
Malachi Starks had a good game.
And Malachi Starks had a good game. And it really KJ Bolden made some good plays on the ball. I still don't think that was defensive pass interference in the end zone on third down. They probably would have gone for it on fourth. Maybe they score there. Another call that wasn't great on the part of the officiating crew. Certainly, it's a good thing, and I like that Kirby was a little fired up. You don't see that side of him in an interview too often. He's usually pretty straightforward, but I like that he let him know.
I want to ask y'all this, kind of to wrap up the controversial PI call. You brought up that you're thinking maybe the big bosses are saying, hey, let's keep this game interesting. Tell the refs to make that call. I want to ask, does it matter that it's the home team, and does it matter that it's Texas? Like, if this is a Georgia game and Texas fans are throwing the beer cans on Sanford Stadium, does the game stop and get reviewed? Or let's say that this game or the same situation happened in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa. Does Alabama get that call and reverse it?
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point. It's all about the circumstances, especially the magnitude of the game.
Yes.
I mean,
It's big when you have the number one team involved, too.
I think it being a home team matters more than it being Texas.
Yeah,
Like, I think
if this happened at
I think it would have. I think it would have been
circumstance.
reversed if it was at Alabama, but I would never expect Alabama. Even though I don't like Alabama, I would never expect their fans to throw trash on the field.
yeah.
It just depends. I mean, is that one of the places that sells alcohol? That's the main thing here.
Yeah, maybe is the culprit,
But another
potentially.
question off of that too is: do you think there should have been a penalty thrown, whether it be delay of game or unsportsmanlike conduct, on the fans?
No, that's a great question.
In the game, because I personally think if you're going to overturn the call, which obviously they did, at least you've got to hit them with the delay of game. Like, that stopped the game.
And officials
And
have,
the ball was set.
officials have done that before.
Yeah.
They'll throw flags on, whether it's the coach or assistant coach
Yeah.
or someone on that sideline. So, no, that's a great point. I think you can throw a
Like, I
flag on them.
don't know if that necessarily changes them scoring because they're, on the 9-yard line, it moves them back.
24. They probably still get some points out
Like,
of that drive, but nearly not enough.
but at least I think that does help set more of a precedent against throwing stuff on the field in the future.
I think a precedent has definitely been set. I think most officiating crews look at that game. They know, one, they can't let fans get away with throwing stuff on the field, and two, you have to make sure you make the call and you can't change it, and that has to be established by, I guess they're SEC refs. They're paid by the conference, right, to do that game, most likely. So the SEC will probably have, and I think they did a good job in just, identifying, certain points of emphasis. Like, okay,
the SEC did put out a fairly weak statement about
it does go to the other team too, right?
Just another issue I have is that, this is the biggest game that the SEC has for the week, ABC has for the week. So is it just going to continue that every marquee game is going to be, kind of rude by poor officiating? And I would hate for that to be the case. Like, is this the best that they have? Because it has to be, right? It was the biggest game of the week.
I think that was an outlier for sure. I mean, I think the Georgia-Alabama game, there really weren't that many calls that were that bad. I mean, it came down to the players making the plays to win the game. And I still think it did to a degree here, too, just because Georgia dominated so well in the first half.
And we were also playing noticeably more physical, I feel like,
most
than
definitely
in other games.
Yeah, and I think this is a learning experience for a lot of these guys on officiating crews to just learn, and obviously I think they'll have, some experience to do that. Obviously there's not as big of a game this week too, but I think we're going to get into maybe the wider landscape of college football, because obviously Georgia got the defining win this weekend, but some other big games as well.
Before we move on really quickly, from the chat, this is coming from, they admit that they're biased towards UGA, but they want to know everyone's thoughts on what they feel is like that ESPN and College Game Day was blatantly against UGA, and that media as a whole just seems to be against Georgia. And if you feel the same way, and what your thoughts are on that.
I don't think so.
I'll say this, and some of my friends brought it up as well. I was watching Game Day, and I just, at one point, Reese Davis was like, I'm not sure if Georgia's going to even get a first down this game.
That's bizarre.
Towards the latter
That's
part of the show.
thing to say.
It's a crazy thing to say, and that's probably maybe not exactly what he meant, but you still get the point. It's felt a little obvious that they were playing sides. Especially Paul Feinbaum. He is.
I think that's all he lives for.
I don't want to say he's especially anti-Georgia, but it's so clear to me he does not want Georgia to reach like the heights of Alabama, and he'll kind of throw little jabs like, "Oh, if Georgia loses this game, they've lost their supremacy in the SEC. They're no longer relevant." things like that. Kirby can't be the best coach ever. So I don't know if it was. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
I think that there's kind of like a fatigue. It's like everyone likes to see Georgia rise to the top, but once they are the back-to-back national championships, then they want to start bringing them down. Yeah. And I think there's also the factor that Texas has looked good to this point of the season. They were ranked number 1 for a reason. They had a home game. So if they had unbiased analysis predicting Texas would win, sure. But I can't imagine that every single analyst on Game Day, on SEC Nation, Paul Feinbaum, the whole media landscape, there had to be more support for Georgia. The betting odds, the book spread got to 5.5, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, at one point Texas was bizarre. minus 200. So
yeah, I think college game day rides the hype for sure.
Though, so I'll say that.
I think they like new storylines, especially on game day. Like we saw it last year with Colorado. They were eating that up all year long of just how good they were going to be with Dion and everything. And anybody who actually watched college football knew that program was not getting turned around the first year he was there.
So much better.
They have.
But now that they're good, they're not getting that much attention.
Exactly.
And they just like to cycle through things. So this year they kind of hopped on the Texas bandwagon, and I think it was more them pro-Texas rather than anti-Georgia. Desmond Howard said, there's a new sheriff in town in the SEC, and it's Texas. I don't think that was him necessarily hating on Georgia. I think it was just them hopping on the bandwagon.
What have they done or showed you to make you think that? And I think another small point of it is you hate to circle back to Bama, but Bama did beat us, which is really unfortunate because Bama's really not that good now.
Yeah.
And I think that's a part of it is they were very, very wrong on that take. Probably thinking Bama was gonna, be clear and cut favorites to get to the national championship.
Well, and I think you have to factor in the fact similarly that we just haven't really played great all season long. So they're they and I think a lot of people were thinking this isn't the same Georgia team that we've seen the last 3 years.
I think that's
maybe they are on
correct.
the downfall.
Yeah.
You brought up a point. I'm sorry.
You're good.
You brought up how you thought it was more pro-Texas than anti-Georgia and how the new storyline element. I think you're so right on that because everybody wants to see Texas run the SEC. Just because they're the new team in the conference and they've had good success under Sark, I think they want a new crown. They want to anoint Texas and Sark as the next person to hold the mantle after Nick Saban in Alabama. For whatever reason it is, I guess they're already fatigued of Georgia and they just are so pro-Texas at this point.
I would say it's definitely pro-Texas. I mean, if you're on College Game Day, you feel the energy. Pat McAfee, we clearly know he's an entertainer.
Yes.
Not a real analyst.
Not a real answer.
I mean, I love...
Don't come back to us either, McAfee.
Don't come for us.
Don't come back rooting for us after I've watched you on game day.
I forgot them dogs were hell. Don't come at us with that.
Yeah, after
I guess I just forgot
the spiel about how Georgia could win, and then he changes and gets the Texas fans all hyped.
I think so. I mean, that's part of his appeal on College Game Day. I think you like it when you're neutral. I mean, the Cal Game Day was pretty great when he does that kind of thing.
You like it when
it's fun. It's fun, but it can get over the top really easily. Definitely. I want to know what you guys think on Saban did the whole little coin flip thing.
Thought it was a weak move.
I thought he had it already in his head. I
thought for sure he was going to pick Georgia because I feel like since he's left, which obviously was not that long ago, he's kind of, I feel like, been a fan in a sense. Obviously not, but he's liked Georgia. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
And very, very respectful of them. Going to your point of it being he already picked. I know for sure he already picked because the graphics are done before the show starts. So I mean, maybe he did decide with a coin flip before, and that's how he ended up with Texas. But also, if you realize on the show when he flipped it, he didn't say which one was going to be which. He just flipped it and was like, "Oh, Texas."
That's a great point.
So I think, but I was surprised in him picking that. But yeah. I didn't know if you guys...
Not too surprised.
I wanted him to give real analysis. Give us a real reason why.
Yeah.
Don't make it a coin toss. I can't decide because these are both former coaches on my staff, so I can't pick favorites between my two sons. That was kind of the analogy funny. I got. He's the father that can't pick between who's his favorite son.
That's fair enough. Honestly, I think, it doesn't matter, I guess, who gets picked, because we usually do better when you don't pick us. So
Exactly.
I liked the fact that it happened that way.
The reverse rat poison.
I just feel like they're always so like specific on like not picking one team all across the board. Like they always try to save the graphic at the end. And I get that Herb Street wasn't picking, and he's normally the one to save the graphic, but
on air.
Oh,
go
Yeah,
for it.
I saw
Go
that
for it.
earlier. Yeah, Jalen Johnson signing a 5-year, $150 million extension.
That's big.
After his
Well-deserved.
rookie
That's
deal.
big for the Birds. Well deserved.
Yeah, we'll get into
Hope
that a
he can
little
have
bit later.
big
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, well, we'll get into the next week's schedule. Obviously, Georgia on bye ahead of the world's greatest outdoor cocktail party against Florida in 2 weeks. 7 games through, and they've climbed all the way back up to number 2 in the AP poll behind the undefeated Oregon Ducks, who are number 1 for the first time in a while since probably about the Marcus Mariota days about a decade ago. But we'll look at some of these matchups from last week. Obviously, the big one was Alabama-Tennessee, and Tennessee hands the Crimson Tide their second loss of the season, 24-17, and maybe just a bad week for a lot of these big quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe threw the game-losing interception as they were looking to drive down the field and tie it up. And when you look at Texas, obviously Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning in his short time in the game both did not have great starts. We look at some of the other games of the week. USC obviously drops another game,
That was
unfortunately,
unnecessary.
to Maryland.
That was an unnecessary
How did it
call
look in
out.
person?
What?
How did that game look in person, Katie?
Probably just like USC's the last 10 years, just so promising. They're so close and so promising, but you just can't quite.
It looked like every other game we've
know,
played this season.
Can't quite get it done.
Looked like every other game we've played this season besides LSU
Yeah, speaking
and
of
Utah
LSU,
State, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah, speaking of LSU, maybe establishing themselves as another favorite for the SEC title. They moved to 6-1 with a big win over Arkansas. They move up to number 8. Tennessee climbs back to number 7 after beating Alabama. Miami still undefeated after a crazy game against, who I believe it was Louisville. Back and forth. Cam Ward, maybe the only guy that hasn't had a reality check of the top quarterbacks. And you can maybe say Shedeur Sanders as well, obviously, but
Yes,
Miami's
but they are
still
2
undefeated as well.
blown calls away from having 2 losses, which
Yeah,
would
they're
kind of
definitely-
knock him out.
Their defense
But
is really concerning. I don't know when it's going to happen, but they're going to go down before the regular season's over. I truly believe.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe another team that goes down soon. Penn State still undefeated, going to Madison to play Wisconsin, who moved to 5-2. Ohio State stays at 4. They had an off week this week. Texas drops down to number 5. You have Clemson, who quietly have reeled off 6 wins in a row after losing to Georgia at the start. They play Louisville in 2 weeks. Iowa State still undefeated, another crazy comeback. They stay undefeated at 7-0. So does BYU on a last-second touchdown on the Friday game
Cougars
against Oklahoma State. Maybe those two meet up in the Big 12 title game. Indiana also still undefeated. I think that's got to be the performance of the week against Nebraska. Thoroughly dominated even after their starting quarterback goes out with an injury.
They're a good story. I'm sorry, I was watching the big noon kickoff, and their new coach, Kirk Cignetti. It was just so funny because they were kind of previewing him and how he's always won, and he carries this great aura about him, and they like talk to him in the literally minutes before the game, and he's just talking about his team, and he just so vindictively says to the reporter, "We're gonna play well today," and just walks off, and then they end up scoring 50 points and win by 35. So.
Yeah, against the Nebraska team, a lot of people would maybe take a step forward. Big loser of the week, definitely Alabama, who falls all the way down to number 15. Kansas State up to number 16. Boise State drops 2 spots, even though they were on the off week. Only losses to the number 1 team in the country, though, so obviously Ashton Jeanty, probably the favorite for the Heisman at this point. They get things started on week 9 against UNLV on Friday.
Is Colorado ranked?
They are not, but both Army and Navy still undefeated. Navy goes into South Bend to play Notre Dame this week, and Vanderbilt ranked for the first time in quite a long time.
Wow.
5-2, played a Ball State team that obviously not as strong. Struggled for a bit in that game, but then come back and win it. And now they have a chance to play Texas in Nashville, and we know what they can do at home, so maybe they shock us again.
Are they going to be taking down goalposts down Broadway again?
Maybe so. Another game this week will be Pitt playing Syracuse. Illinois faces Oregon. Maybe the game of the week there, and I know I believe College Game Day is going to Bloomington. Indiana's playing Washington on Saturday at noon, which would be an interesting game.
Yeah.
TJ, Colorado didn't even get any votes.
Yeah,
they are 5-2 so far this season.
I think they're disrespecting. I think they're disrespecting Colorado a little bit. Maybe it's because like last year they started off pretty good and
they also,
but they're like seemingly underdogs, or the lines are really close in all these games, and they just keep winning. And Kansas State, like you mentioned, they're 16th. They lost really close to Kansas State. Just a couple weeks ago, they beat Arizona pretty well. They have a fairly light schedule. Like, I can easily see Colorado winning out.
Their only bad loss was that Nebraska loss. Other than that, they've been a good team.
Yeah, they really don't have the strength of schedule, though, because they don't play Iowa State or BYU. Those are the only two teams in the Big 12 that are still undefeated, if I'm not mistaken.
All their wins are against not
decent
great teams.
Arizona was probably their most impressive win of the year, for sure.
It was, but they're also not
take
ranked.
It back
so
Dion.
If they win out, though, I'm sure that they'll be.
If they win out, they'll be ranked by the end of the year. But
I think it's absurd that they're not getting votes. But Duke is, Liberty is. I mean, and respectfully, South Carolina,
and they're talking about they're just talking about Shedeur. They're talking about him being the number one overall.
South Carolina's had some good wins, though.
Duke has also had some decent wins. They were undefeated for a while, and then obviously dropped that game to Georgia Tech.
Florida State for the first time in program history.
Ever.
Get Florida State while they're down right now.
Get them.
Because it's going to be a while before they get back up, most likely. Indiana, first place, tied with, technically, Oregon right now. Still 3 teams in the Big Ten that are undefeated, 2 in the Big 12. And as you said, Colorado will have a chance to beat some of these teams as well. Obviously, don't play BYU or Iowa State, but they still play Texas Tech and Cincinnati. Both of them have 3-1 conference records, have 2 losses. So maybe they climb to about third, maybe on the doorstep if BYU or Iowa State really fall off a cliff. They actually don't play each other, BYU and Iowa State do, though. So we'll see how that works out. Really, BYU always had a big win somewhere in the Big 12 or as an independent, but they really never have started so well. So it's really surprising to me that they've done so well. But yeah, we'll get into a few games before going on to a short Falcons recap. But I think Illinois-Oregon, definitely the biggest game of the week. Oregon favored by 25 points against a ranked Illinois team. Obviously, they did drop that game to Penn State, but a crazy line. And Texas favored by almost 19 against Vanderbilt. Penn State only favored by 6.5 on the road against Wisconsin. And the other big matchup, LSU going into College Station to play Texas A&M. That will probably determine if we think Georgia wins out at this point. The team that Georgia might be playing in the SEC title game, because both those teams are 6-1. Both their losses were to non-conference, or no.
Yeah, they're both undefeated in conference.
Undefeated in conference. Their only loss was to a non-conference opponent at the start of the season, and they've both been rolling. And especially for LSU, if you win that game, you go home in 2 weeks after that, and you play Alabama in Death Valley, a chance to really eliminate Alabama from any sort of postseason contention. Could be crazy.
I don't know. Maybe it's a bold take, but I think Bama ends up with 4 or 5 losses.
They definitely could. They don't play as strong a schedule as they usually do.
It's just like they're playing Missouri this week, and I mean, they're no shoe-in. You can't shoe Alabama in for any victories, really. They have a poor defense, and as we saw against Tennessee, if Jalen Milroe isn't Superman, they are going to have a really tough time winning. And another thing was just their playmakers outside of Milroe and Williams is starting to be a concern. I remember they were talking about it a lot on the broadcast. Who does Alabama have to go to? Because these backs aren't, backs that we're used to Alabama having. Jahmyr Gibbs most recently. But
I think a lot of it maybe just comes down to the fact that Saban lost when he left, so many of their players that maybe were their best players left. I mean, and that's showing up a little bit. Caleb Downs, I don't know how well he's played this year, but I think he's probably arguably the best safety prospect coming out of college since maybe Kyle Hamilton, Jamal Adams.
To our boy Malachi.
Well, obviously. And him,
both
too.
top 10 guys.
They're both top 10 guys. I don't think they're in the same class either. I think Malachi will be out before Caleb Downs.
I believe
so we'll have to see. I think
Malachi's done after this year. So.
Yeah, Malachi will definitely be, I think, a star in the league. He's been, a star since day one. Alabama doesn't have the strongest strength of schedule, though. The next 2 games, and they're still undefeated at home on the season as well. I think that probably made the difference for them against South Carolina. I think they could have a bounce-back week against Missouri. Obviously, LSU could maybe be the end of it for their college football hopes and playoff hopes this year. But their last few games are Mercer, Oklahoma on the road, and the Iron Bowl against Auburn. All those teams have been struggling. So they could still easily go 9-3. Probably can't make the playoff at that point, but could be a decent season, I guess, for
Any team
Caleb
could make it
DeBoer.
at 9-3, it's Alabama.
It would be Alabama.
I'm pushing back on Bama,
But we'll have to see.
I think they're that good, and it'd be something to see them be unranked in the first season
Definitely
after
so.
Saban. That'd be pretty sweet.
I'm pushing back on Bama too because, yes, like Ryan Williams is incredible, but if you watch like the first half at least of that game, it was like Jalen Milroe targeted him like 10 times and it was only 3 catches.
Tennessee's defense,
Yeah.
I think, is
They were good.
better than we're giving them credit for sure. And it'll be interesting. I do like
That'll be
that
a
we're
big
playing
game
them
for
at home again this year because they're 2
course.
best teams. We've gotten them in Athens, so we'll have to see on the rest of their season. But we'll get into a short recap of the Falcons as well with about 12 minutes to go here. Big loss on the road to at home against the Seattle Seahawks. Both those teams are 4-3 after this week. Falcons really just kind of a day to forget. Things maybe snowballed a little bit. Obviously, the final score maybe doesn't represent the true nature of the game. It was a close game until probably the fumble return killed any chance of the Falcons having a chance to come back and win the game. Did actually have more yards than the Seahawks throughout the course of the game, but it was just mistakes at times that I think really killed the team, especially the last drive where Seattle goes down the field and scores a touchdown with a minute left. Second straight week a team does that to the Falcons defense. Maybe some louder calls for a pass rusher. We heard the Browns are maybe shopping Myles Garrett. There's rumors about that. So if we can get a guy like that or Max Crosby on the team, I'd love to do that. But what were your overarching thoughts on that game?
Yeah, the Falcons offensively just looked completely flat. This felt like a team that was really riding high off the win streak that they've had, and deservingly so. Coming into the game, you thought Falcons would be heavily favored. This is a Seahawks team that was on a 3-game losing streak, if I'm not mistaken. So this had the recipe to be a dominant Falcons win, but yeah.
No, the Falcons never won this many in a row. I knew they were going to lose.
That played, your point about the Seahawks losing 3 straight played a factor. I think they maybe needed it to win a little more.
And that's such a thing in the NFL is like
Yeah.
the more hungry, the more desperate team that needs that win is normally the team that shows up.
I was nervous for this game, I will say.
Overarching thoughts, I did watch it, not super in-depth. I thought Terrell did not play very good. And that's tough. It's a tough assignment to get Metcalf. But there were a couple plays that I was just really puzzled on what he was doing in coverage. Especially, I think there was a touchdown pass where
to DK?
Yeah, DK.
That was
that was that was the end of the drive, I think.
DK is running like a seam, and Terrell is like playing a kind of a zone concept, and he just lets DK run right past him, like just right into the end zone, and there's no one over the top. So.
That's a busted coverage.
Yeah.
I think that was definitely. I think it was the touchdown because he only did have one touchdown in the game.
On DK's one touchdown, that was an amazing throw by Gino.
It was.
Was it like
So irritating.
Right before the halftime, but that's unacceptable for the Falcons to give that up. You think
So
guaranteed
irritating.
you're holding them to 3, and then you give up a touchdown with 4 seconds left.
I couldn't believe like it was. And again, another third down. They're 3rd and 15 on their 30. If you got them to kick a field goal there, that touchdown at the start of the second half actually would have given the Falcons the lead, and then maybe it's a different game. You can rely on Bijan Robinson, who had a good game, had 100 yards on the ground. Really the only thing that was working for the Falcons at times. O-line didn't play very well. Obviously, I'd have to blame this whole game, most of it, on the defense, because the last drive of the first half killed their momentum going into the second. Obviously, the offense did their part to get them back in the game, but then the next drive, you get them 3rd and 9, roughing the passer call extends the drive. You have another, what was the other penalty that they had? Was it like a hands to the face that Nate Landman had? Both those penalties happen on the same drive, and they eventually score the touchdown. Then you're behind 10. You have to pass the ball. Kirk runs out of the pocket, and he gets strip sacked, and they come and return it back for a touchdown. I don't think that they played really as bad as the score shows, but I was nervous for this game. I did think if the Falcons beat the Seahawks here, the Seahawks might have been really in trouble for the rest of the season.
They're in first.
They are in first place in their division, but they had a rough stretch, especially that Giants game, and the 49ers kind of just ran them off the field too.
Another factor for the Seahawks maybe playing well is their head coach Mike McDonald was back in his home state. Former UGA grad.
And interesting, he never played college football.
He did not. My dad literally just told me this weekend that he went to Georgia. I didn't even know.
I think like a big part of this game specifically is very dependent on what happens like in the next week or so. Because the loss, you look at it in hindsight and you're like, okay, they were on a run, whatever. But now they're 4-3. The Bucks are playing tonight. If the Bucks win, they'll be 5-2, and then that's a big game next week. That is going to be in Tampa Bay. I believe it's Sunday. But Sunday. If you come out a little sluggish in that one and lose that one, then it could be problems down the line. Or you're looking at maybe not winning the division per se.
I think the Falcons would probably prefer for the Bucks to win this game, and that might sound crazy, but if they do, the Bucks are first place in the division. The Falcons are now out of a playoff spot at 4-3. That's how competitive the NFC has been so far, because the whole NFC North is playing out of their minds so far this season. Lions and Vikings are both 5-1. Packers are 5-2, and the Bears are last place at 4-2, which would still be good enough to be first place in almost every other division in the NFC, which is nuts. And then the Falcons come in on the back foot a little bit. If you get the win in Tampa, you have the 2-0 record over the Buccaneers. You're 4-0 in the NFC South, and that could really stamp you as the favorite for the division again. The back half of the schedule isn't that difficult, in all honesty. After the Bucs and the Cowboys the next 2 weeks, you have a lot of teams that are reeling, in all honesty. Saints dropped to 2-5. Everyone's injured on that team.
I think the Cowboys are also kind of
The Cowboys
reeling.
are, but that's if the Cowboys lose the week before that, if they who are they playing next Sunday?
49ers.
The 49ers next Sunday. That's another game that the Falcons could come into flat. Cowboys need a win to save the season, and A.J. Terrell has to match up against
the Falcons,
a receiver better than him.
The Falcons wish that Cowboys game was on the road because Dallas can't play at home this season.
Maybe so. You hope the Cowboys I don't think they'll get a win against the 49ers, but I guess we'll see. But then
the 49ers did lose Ayuk for the season.
I'm not buying the 49ers.
Ayuk is out for the season, and Debo got hurt too.
Noting the history, they just went to the Super Bowl.
You would have been better if they had won this week, I think.
Yeah. I don't think they're the same. They're missing McCaffrey. They're missing Ayuk. These are like...
But what about when
Debo is looking...
Debo's hurt. Debo got hurt too.
And Purdy without these weapons is not the same guy.
But when they're back...
But they're not
forced. That's going to be a second half.
This reminds me, I think, a lot of the 2020 49ers, the season after they went to the Super Bowl, and everybody got injured. Nick Bosa tore his ACL. Kittle missed basically the whole season. Greenlaw missed the whole year. And they were not a good football team, but they had the opportunity to try and trade up and draft Trey Lance. That didn't work out, but I think they're a good enough team. Shanahan will get them to the postseason.
They'll probably drag us around.
And then you never know. I think this was the first time the Falcons came into a game and they really weren't playing a team that was on a save your season kind of game, and unfortunately the Seahawks were there. They played like their season was on the line. The Falcons didn't. I think that's the difference maker. But looking at the last few weeks of the season, the last 8 games I think are very manageable. You have a lot of these teams, the best teams that you're playing, are on the road in this stretch. Obviously, the Bucs game will be critical. If you get that win and you can win the next 3 out of the next 4, maybe you drop to the Cowboys game. But if you win the Cowboys game, you can afford to maybe lose to the Saints or the Broncos on the road before you get into the bye week. And then you've got the Chargers, the Vikings, Raiders, Giants, Commanders, Panthers. Commanders are better than you think, or than we thought they would be.
The
coming into this
Chargers are
season.
a little better.
And the Chargers are a little better. You have that game at home.
And the Vikings.
And the Vikings. And you have some opportunities, I think, to really do better at the end of the season. And I like that we're playing a bunch of good teams, because the Falcons always have that one game where they just play terrible against a terrible team. When you have these teams every week, you have to be on your A game, and I think the Falcons play better when they have a good team in front of them, because we really haven't had that the last 3 years, and I like that that's changed a little bit.
And I know Kirk threw a couple interceptions, but I really just don't think those were like too meaningful of picks. They're kind of later.
Not really.
They were
both at the end of the game.
Yeah.
I think one of them hit Drake London in the hands a little bit. That was Kirk's fault, obviously. Yeah. He should have just tucked the ball. But the Seahawks were really just sacking him every play on those last few drives.
That's the only concerning thing for me, is just stacking up injuries on the offensive line.
Yeah, that's not good either. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more healthy on that side of the ball. But we'll get into the Hawks for a few minutes here at the end of the show. They start their season with the Nets on Wednesday, October 23rd, finishing up their preseason slate. Then they play the Charlotte Hornets on their home court as well Friday. And then the Thunder on the road will be a tough early slate, or an early game, for the Hawks before they get back to play the Wizards on a back-to-back. We'll see how they go to start the season. We'll probably need, at this point,
like 1 minute.
500.
We got 1-2 minutes.
They're going to go 500 on the year.
With how the East is, I have no idea. I think, obviously, the top teams will probably stay there. Boston, I think, is probably the favorite in the East. New York will be up there with the additions they've made. Miami probably will be in there. I think you're probably hoping a dream season is probably 6th place. You probably have to say.
I agree, and that's exactly where I think they'll be.
I think that's a realistic spot, I think, to aim for.
Pick. It's dependent on how they use him, but you got to make strides.
The dream scenario.
This number 1 pick is not a Zion. He is not a LeBron. This is like the most weakest number 1 pick.
Zion good.
It's not that I like.
He'll be a good addition.
Yeah, it's not so much that I love him, compared to some really great number 1 overall picks as recently, but like it's still a number 1 pick, and I think like sometimes you just get blessed with that, and he's a number 1 talent regardless. So I think if they use him right,
I'm saying Hawks miss playoffs.
He's not Wembanyama or Paulo Banchero.
Mixed playoffs as in play in and they don't make it last year. I think
that's
where a lot of people think. I like that they retooled though. I think the dream scenario is you probably have the Celtics, Knicks, and Bucks are the top 3, and then you have, I think, the Sixers and the Heat will probably rebound.
I think
you're in that range. Pacers are still there, but I think you can jump a team like the Magic and the Cavs. Those are the teams you should be competing with.
I like the Cavs.
Well, we know you do.
I can name 8 teams better than the Hawks.
Hawks aren't getting those.
I guess we'll have to get more in depth with it as we see them play the first few games.
The Magic are really good. I forgot.
We'll have
about
to see.
That Banchero.
The defensive play has to improve, but yeah, that'll be, I guess, a talking point for next week. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this week. We'll be back talking some more NCAA football. Obviously, Georgia will not be playing a game. Falcons hopefully will be first in the division again as they travel to Tampa to take on the Buccaneers and the Hawks, getting their season started. But until next Monday, thank you all for listening on 90.5 WOG, and we'll see you next Monday.